Okay, so I've got this part here in my building where I don't have any windows really, and not much that I can see outside from there. So I'm just going to use that at first to set up an interior rendering. And so guys, can you just keep it down while I'm talking? So with the camera tool, I'm going to make a perspective of the interior there. And just remember, when you make your perspectives, keep the target as far from the camera as you can, or try to include everything that you want to see near that target. Don't put the target too close to your camera, in other words. Okay, so I've got a pretty simple interior there, but that's going to give me something to work with to set up my lighting and just go through materials as well. And the only thing I'm going to change though is the field of view by selecting that border. It's going to bring that out a little bit, because the default field of view is too narrow. And if you've done any photography, you'd know how field of view can affect your perspective. So then with the walls that I have, you can see they're getting interfered with by the columns. So back in the plan, you can see the wall is again butting up to the column. So I'm just going to put a quick lining over that, which is a good way often of tidying up those kinds of inconsistencies. So I'm just going to use 30mm toilet partition to begin with, and then edit it, duplicate. I'm going to make this one of my feature wall panels. So I'm just going to call it that, feature wall, well for now, number 1. And I'll change the thickness to 20mm. So you see why that's going to be useful once I do my materials. Okay, so in the height, I'm just going to set or leave set to level 1, but you'll see then I'm going to bring that down afterwards to my ceiling. Location line I'll set to finish face interior. And then I'm just going to draw along the surface of that wall, essentially to cover it. And this is what would happen in real life. So if you need to line a wall like that, that's the easiest way. Just put a lining straight over it instead of trying to mess with the original wall. So just using again a new wall. So back in my perspective, now I can see that as a single surface, which is what I want. You can still see the lines coming through from the columns. So I'm going to go to wireframe. It won't print with those, but to take them out of this view and just make sure they won't interfere, I'm going to use VH with one selected, which is view hide, and then the wall behind my lining, I'm going to select it and then right click, hide in view elements. So for rendering, it helps to have the view set up as cleanly as you can. And then the floor, you can see is still set to my 500mm floor. So I'm just going to change that in properties now to the standard timber wood finish, which is a thinner floor, and that's going to give me room for the ceiling. Then I can come back to my ground floor ceiling plan and put my ceiling in. Okay, so with your ceilings, at first you might be just making them the shape of your floor, and at first that is absolutely fine. But then once you get more into the detail of your construction, you realise the ceilings don't actually need to be that big quite often. So here, and this is how they're built as well in real life. Here I've got this area where my ceiling needs to go, so I don't need to take it past any of those wall edges. And so with the wall tool, I'm going to just draw in one more wall down here to block that space off, using just a generic wall for now. And then going back to the ceiling tool, oops. Okay, so there, hopefully you can see that red outline. it's already found the shape of my ceiling. I don't even need to go and trace that. And so I'm going to type in the ceiling height I want, which is 4200, I think. And then I'm just going to click inside that area, and that's my ceiling done. Okay, so back in the perspective view now, I can see that ceiling. And we can see a line between this wall and the ceiling, which is a nice thing to have. If you really want to, you could attach that lining to the ceiling, which would also be a good thing, because the lining would stop at the ceiling. So I've got a view where hopefully I can see maybe not in this one. So I've got some others. Yeah, so I'll just bring this section box back. There we are. Okay, so there's my wall lining, and I can now use attach top base and choose the ceiling. Okay, so it's stopping it there. My ceiling then would have to be extended to bring it out over the lining. But that's a simple thing if you use edit boundary to just align it. Yep, there we are. Okay, so that's a good way to have your ceiling. And that way, when you render as well, there are no leaks where the light can escape or get in from somewhere else. So then I'll just put some lights in and give you an idea about the setup of those. And then the main options you have. So with the component tool, I've got some lights loaded already. But I'm going to go to Load Family and get some from the library on the P drive, which are a little bit better. So on the P drive, Interior Design, Revit Library, and then Lighting, and so I'm looking for Recessed Can Glow, and it is, so not in Lighting, it's in Lighting Fixtures. Recess Can Glow, there we are. So this light family you won't find in the regular library. It's one I've made, but you can just get it from the library here. Okay, so I'm just going to place these against the wall there. And then back into the 3D view. Just to check that they're doing something, I'm going to go to the render dialog, leaving it on draft, but then I'm going to change it to interior artificial only. And one of the main issues with rendering artificial lights is the sun. When you try to render with both, it will make it difficult to know what's happening with the artificial lights. It's so much brighter than virtually any man-made light source you'll ever encounter. So when you're working with the sun, you basically treat it very differently to any other light. It's so much brighter that you have to. So it's often easier to work with them separately. So artificial light on its own, it will set the exposure to a decent value, and if you go to render, you should be able to see something straight away. And if you can't see anything, you know, again, straight away that the lights aren't working. So there we go, I can see something. Now if I go to adjust exposure, I can make this just a little bit brighter, maybe down to about 5 or so. And then I'll be able to see more of the effect of that light. So that's the first thing. Before you go too far with your lights, that's the number one thing. Make sure they're working and you have some idea of the brightness. But then I just want to give you an idea about some of the other main kinds of lights you have. So back in the ground floor plan, I'm going to put in the, again, with the component tool, load family, the studio light. So this you'll find in any of the lighting folders. Okay, so architectural, internal, and here we are, studio light. Okay, so studio lights are a floating light. If you haven't used them, I'm just going to put one in the middle here. It's telling me I can't see it in this view. And that's fine. I'm going to change to my ground floor ceiling plan. And I can see it there. So I want to render just with this light. And so back in my perspective view, there it is. I'm going to go to the render dialog. And then I'm going to go to artificial lights here. And there you can see I have all these different lights here. So I'm going to go to new, and I'll call the first light group maybe this zone 1. And then I'm going to move into zone 1. I'm going to go to edit, and then just clicking add, I can select my studio light. Okay, so back to artificial lights. Now you can see, looking at zone 1, it has just that studio light, and I can turn all the other lights off. Right, so once you have a few lights in there, it's much easier to manage your lights, whether they're turned on and off in here. So again, if I go to render now, I'm only going to see the studio light. Which can be a nice light if you get it positioned properly. But if it's too close to other surfaces, it's going to be obvious, and it's going to come up with this horrible glowing effect that's usually not a good thing. So watch out with studio lights, and the reason they work the way they do is because they're uniform diffuse lights. Right, so that's again the same light here. You can see I've just switched to a different view so that I get edit family, and that's a real trick with Revit. To show you again, so that's clear. If I select the light in a perspective view, it isn't going to give me the option to do that. So it's one of those things with Revit. Perspective views don't let you edit as much as other views do. So just by switching to any non-perspective view, even if it's a 3D view, that's fine. Now you can see I've got this option to edit family. So with that, then I'm going to select in my family file the light source itself, that yellow thing. Okay, so then with that selected, I can go to light source definition, and then you can see first the emission shape. So that's the shape of the bulb essentially. And then the distribution, which is probably the more important thing. So this is the way the light is emitted from that initial shape. And so here you can see, because it's spherical, it's uniform, emitting light evenly in all directions. We can have something similar. So that's just a hemispherical, so it emits evenly, but only within 180 degrees from that source. And then you have the others that can maybe be a bit more interesting and give you a bit more control. Web and spot. So with the web distribution, you use a file essentially that the lighting engineers put together for you, and they're set up for all the main kinds of lights. So that's very accurate, but also can be a bit technical. Spotlights, on the other hand, can do most of the same things, and you control them directly. So I'm just going to set it to a spot. Okay. And now you can see it's just changed it automatically to have the distribution that I want for this light. And again, with the light source selected, you can see over on the left in properties, things like the spot field angle and spot beam angle. And the tilt there, you can see, is on 60 degrees, so I'm going to change that one right away. So here, the tilt 60, I'm going to make 90. And just to get this, I'll just point that out again. In properties, I'm going to family types to see all of these things. Okay, so with family types, then the tilt angle, we'll change that to 90. And without getting out of this dialog box, I'm just going to hit apply, and I should be able to see that change. And that's the best way to experiment with families. If they have these properties set up, try adjusting them in family types to see what they'll do. So I've got the tilt angle set obviously to 90. Then these other properties, spot field and spot beam angle, you can see there, it's this angle coming out on the outside, and then which is the spot field angle, and then the angle on the inside, this smaller cone, is the spot beam angle. And so those two angles give you the range of the light from brightest to darkest. And so that's how you get that soft edge or hard edge to your light. Now, I don't need to change those here. I'm just going to hit OK. And I'm going to load that in. But first, I'm going to save as family. And I'm just going to save this into my folder for now. Okay, it's giving me a different name. And then with load into project, get the right one. Okay, so I'm just going to click to place this. And again, I'm getting the warning, but if I look in the perspective view, we can see it there. So this is my new one. That's the old one, so I'll delete the old one. And with my new one, I'll render again, but I've got to check my artificial lights, and you can see that the grouping needs to be updated. So edit, add the new one. And then back to render, and we can see what spotlights do. Well, not a lot there, so let's see what's happening there. There's, oops. So I think my lighting groups might have just been, no, okay, so let's just have a look at the brightness. So, well, that's really good to see actually, because it's the whole point of testing. So I'll just show you that again. Rendering now the downlights at the top are giving a little bit of a glow, but otherwise we can't see anything much. So I'm going to make that quite a bit brighter. We still can't see anything. So that means the light is not doing a whole lot. Back in here, you can see it's definitely turned on. So looking at the properties then, if I select the light, edit type, then you can see all of those same properties that I had before if you scroll to the bottom. And it takes a bit of time to get used to adjusting your lights, but you've got the initial intensity essentially to set your brightness, and you can just work in multiples of what is already there. I'm going to hit OK, and I'm just going to render again. Okay, so there's something happening with that light. It's not working for some reason, so let's just get rid of these downlights. Just going to delete them. And, well, just to test it, I'm going to switch it back to the other light. I'm going to get rid of my light groups. So with the lights there, I'm just going to turn all the lights on with the artificial lights. Render. Let's see if that's causing the problem. Yep, there we go. Okay, so it's my lighting groups making that light not come on. So let's see, was it? So let's just try that again. It does get confused sometimes. You've got to test it. Yep, there we go. Okay, so now it's working with the same settings, and so just watch out for that. Sometimes they will turn off the wrong lights. And so back into my light now, edit type, and I'll change the brightness again. Right, so 100 watts you might think is a fairly bright light, but how do you know if 100 watts is a bright light or not? It seems fairly bright here, but that's mainly because of the exposure. So have you had a look at any other ways of doing lighting units apart from in watts? Have you used lumens or lux or any other lighting units? I'll just show. No, the brightness, the way you measure how bright they are. So if I select this light and then go again to edit type, down to initial intensity, you can see then when it's got a wattage, it'll always have an efficiency as well, because the wattage really doesn't tell you anything except the power consumption. Right, so lights that consume more power, I suppose, generally are brighter, but not always. So again, it's the power consumption when you see the wattage, which is only an indication of the brightness. If you want a unit that gives you its true brightness, then you can work with lumens, and so then you can compare that with other lights. Otherwise, you need to know the efficiency. And so there, 7,000 is very bright, actually. So I'm going to take that down to about 3,000 and just render again. Yep, so getting a bit more control over the light. And then you can see these angles coming down from that light cone. So with the light selected again, edit type, and you can see we have the field angle and the beam angle. So at the moment they're fairly different. Field angle is on 90, beam angle on 30. I'm going to make them both 60. And then render again. Okay, so now I've got a much more hard edge light because I don't have any transition from where its maximum brightness is to its minimum. So there's no fall off, essentially, or very, very dramatic fall off. Okay, so again back to edit type, and I'll change those angles again. I'll make the field angle 10 and the beam angle 170. Sorry, other way around maybe, or sometimes, well, didn't like those values, so let's try another one. So back to field angle, I'll make that 10 and see if it'll let me do that. Yep, so it's okay with that, it just didn't like the beam angle. So there is a limit, let's try 120. Yep, that's okay. Alright, so I'll render again, and now I should have a very soft edged light. Well, it's gone to nothing. So that can happen. If you go too far, it's spread it out just too much, and again, I've ended up with no light. So back to edit type, and so 120 is probably a little bit too far. I want to get it over 90, so if I can do that, then no, okay, so it looks like the limit is about 90. But again, you have to just use trial and error with lights and things like this because you're trying to simulate real-world physics, essentially. And even lighting engineers and people who work with light every day don't really understand how it works. It's, so let's just see what I've done with those properties there. So going back to here. Oh, I think I got them the wrong way around. Okay, so that was clever of me. It's because in 3D Studio Max, which is what I use for rendering 90% of the time, you have exactly these properties, but they're just called something different. So 90 should have been the beam angle, sorry, the field angle, and then the beam angle. Yeah, that makes sense. 10. Beam angle is the inner one. Okay, so let's just do this again. Hopefully now I will get my soft edge light. And there we go. So then the other properties there are just worth looking at as well. So back to edit type. And so you've got the initial colour, which will come up as a temperature. And so until you learn what all these different lights do, you can just use the presets. And so generally fluorescent lights are fairly cool. So if you go for even a white fluorescent, that will be a fairly low temperature value. But if you go for cool white, then it'll be, you know, again, a very cool light, which is, there you can see a bit higher. If we go for something like the HPS, here we are. Okay, that's the other extreme. So it's a very warm light. And you can tell from the preview there, I suppose. And light colour is one of the most important things when you're looking at your overall presentation. The tone of it is critical, whether you're going for a cool or warm or neutral tone. And just looking through those different presets there will give you a pretty good feel for the way different lights, colour temperatures work. And so hopefully that's something you're doing more of with your different design work. And so when you see that, and again, if you're not already doing some photography, everyone's got a phone these days that can take better photos than most of the older cameras could anyway. So there's no excuse for not experimenting and having an idea about this. And it's essential for design, really, that you do understand at least the basics of lighting and photography. Alright, so I'm going to go for a, well, I'll go for a warm light to begin with, just to give you an idea of the extreme. So I'll go for, again, the HPS. Oh, and so the other thing I meant to mention there is that you have, as well as the initial colour, which is a temperature range from warm to cool, you have the colour filters. Okay, because you can't achieve every colour using the natural lighting values. It's, it works differently to the way you see the full light spectrum. So to set colours that you can't achieve using those temperature values, you need to apply a filter over the light. And that is, you've got to remember, that's absorbing colour from the initial colour that you start with. So you're subtracting colour, and so you can get some interesting effects, but just think about the way that the light will work when you're doing that. So you've got filters for that, but otherwise, the colour that you start with, the initial temperature colour, is one of the most important things. So my walls at the moment are white. I better get my field angle to be a bit bigger so I can see the colour of that. Oops. Oh, so I'm trying to get the middle button there. There we are. And that I might make a bit brighter, oh sorry, a bit less bright. And then the beam angle, I'll take back out to 40 and field angle 1190. Anyway, I can see very orange looking space, entirely because of the light. Nothing to do with the walls. If I go then to the light again and just change that temperature colour to one of the cool lights, say the fluorescents, or we can even go for something that's say even higher, like xenon. Okay, so now it won't be orange. I haven't touched the walls. All I've done is change the light. And this is a natural effect you will see in the real world all the time, but your eyes compensate and often you don't notice it. But it's definitely a real effect that you have to think about, and it's fundamental to lighting design. Until you understand this, you're not really doing lighting design. So then with the light again selected, back to edit type, and so the only other property I haven't touched there is your light loss factor. Watch out for that, but you can do some interesting things there again, no, it's difficult to control, so maybe just avoid that one at first. Definitely it's going to have an effect though, if you change it. And so then looking at the materials, I might just get a few more of the original lights back. So if I can go back. Yep. Okay, so just with my original downlights. Okay, so looking at those, if I go to edit type, checking the colour there. You can see there it's a fairly warm colour, and I don't want that. I want to get a neutral colour so I can see properly how my materials look. So these reference lights are pretty good. So they're daylight references, and so 500 or 5,000 is a good standard. And then looking at the walls, well actually sorry, the floor I'll start with. Okay, so to select from the perspective, I'm just going to use a trick. I'm going to select with a crossing window over the edge there where I know the floor is, and then I'm going to use Shift to deselect the wall, and that'll leave me just with my floor. And then I'm going to go to edit type, and I'll duplicate this one. And we're going to call this ground floor slab. Edit the structure, and well, I'll show you a few different materials. So have you done polished concrete or looked at ways of doing those sorts of materials? They're actually pretty easy to start for rendering, but the way you build them can be a bit tricky. Basically, yeah. And so, well, I'll do a timber one first. So I've got this 500 thick layer. I'm just going to take that down to 300, which is still thicker than it would be in real life, but that's close enough. I'm going to insert a new layer and move that up to the top, and I'll change the thickness of this just to, well, if it was just the floorboards, then it would only be about 20 or even less. But I'm going to include the battens, so I'll say 40. And I'll change this to finish one. And then the material, I'm just going to hit the browse button to set up my new material, and that's the main thing I wanted to go through with you, just to really make sure you've got all the steps for this. And making a material in Revit does take a bit of getting used to. So just try and follow the steps, these steps every time, and until you really get used to it and don't have to think about it. So I'm starting with a material that's close to what I want. Okay, so I've got wall material 1 there. I'm going to right click and then duplicate that. And I'll just call it wall material 2. That'll be fine. Oh no, sorry, we're doing a floor, aren't we? So we'll call it floor. We'll just floorboards. That's what I meant here. Okay, so the general process is to maybe start with graphics. And the surface pattern, I'm going to click there where it's got none. And go to model. Then in my list there, choose really any of those horizontal ones, but I'm going to go for 150mm horizontal. The cut pattern I'll leave on the diagonal crosshatch. And then on the appearance, this is the most important thing you've got to replace before you can make any changes. So replace the asset. In the Autodesk folder, I'm going to just go to flooring, and I'll just double click on, I'll go to the wood folder to show you. There are plenty of floorboards there. If you go to the appearance folder here, and then in flooring and wood there, you'll find even more. So I'll just get one of those by double-clicking. Close. And I don't remember how much you've done with the adjustment of images in your materials. Have you looked at that at all? Yeah, but not the actual textures. No. So this obviously going to be a new thing for you then. And at first you can just use the materials in the library, and they are really good, and will give you lots of options. But if you do want to put your own images in there, say if you've got your own images, some flooring, you can always change the file. Okay, so there it's taken me to the files that Revit gives you, and there are quite a few there that are great. But I'm going to browse and go to the P drive, and then in again, interior design, you'll see there's a material images folder, which has even more. No, material images, that's one I've put there.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I mean, you get the other one that I started with, but not this one. And so I've got a file here called cedar fence, sorry, that I know works. So I'm waiting for the previews there just so you can see it. A bit slow. Come on. There we go. So here's my flooring. I'm going for the less saturated one. That's all I wanted you to see. And okay, so with open, then I can see my new image, but I've got to set the size. Okay, so if you click on the image swatch, then you'll see all the properties of that image. And unfortunately, there's a bit of a bug in Revit. It's one that's easy to miss. When you click on the image swatch and you see, it'll give you the size here, but you won't see it down below. That's actually a bug. It should show you the size in millimetres. When it comes up like this, these are the right properties, but they're not in the right format. So the simple trick there to make it work properly is close this, just say done, okay, okay, okay. Most of the material's set up anyway, but I'm going to go back to my floor now, edit type, again, edit, there's the material floorboards, browse, and back to appearance. If I click on the swatch now, notice it's different. So it's giving me the size in millimetres. Okay, so if you don't see that, again, it's the bug. When you see it, it's all good, and you can adjust as much as you like. So looking at that image, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 boards in the area of the image. That's just showing a repeat outside it. Okay, so 10 boards, in reality, they might be, say, 120 mil across. But let's say they're bigger, or we want to overscale it a bit, so maybe 150 mil, which is a bit bigger than they would be in real life, but we want to get the look that's going to give us. So 10 boards will be 1,500. Leave this on, and it'll keep it proportional. Okay, so there's my new size. I'm going to check the relief pattern as well, and just make sure that's based on my wood grain, not some other image. And so that's done. And so I'll just click OK, 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 and now, just like always, test the render. Okay, so I've lost my lights. That's because of what I was doing with the artificial lights. Just turn those back on. Okay, so the exposure is too high. So I'm going to go back to adjust exposure, make that darker. And you will get a feel for what these values mean before too long. So there we are on about 4 or so, probably about right. Now that's on draft, but even on draft I can see that the boards are probably going to be okay, but the direction isn't right. So we'll close this. You can see the lines that I've got are going the way that I want them to, but the boards in the render are going the opposite direction. Back to edit type, edit, find the material, browse. And so here it's 150 mil horizontal in graphics, which is how I'm getting these lines. On appearance, if I click on that image swatch there, this is the angle the boards will be, which is vertical. I can make that 90 in properties here. So that will change, done. So again, rendering to test it. And if you do the test renders when you don't have much in there and don't have many lights and the materials are still fairly simple, it goes much, much faster. 10 seconds as opposed to 10 minutes for each, just for a test sometimes. It can take that long and that's tedious. So there we are, I've got the angle that I want. But then you can see also we had the that sort of blurry reflection. Now that can be a good thing if you want that sort of, it's called a glossy reflection, but I don't here. So I'm going to go back to edit type and just show you some of these other properties. So back to edit for the material, clicking on floorboards, browse, and I can find the material there. You're going to get pretty sick of doing that. So as long as you know the name of your material, you can go to manage and click the materials button there, which will take you straight to it, so you don't have to go through your objects every time. And then, again, looking at the Appearance tab, you can see it's got this Finish Set to Semi-Gloss Varnish, and you can change that. Now you can fine-tune it much more than this. Don't think you're limited to these presets, but they're not bad to start with. So if I go for, say, Glossy Varnish, that's actually going to be less blurry reflections. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so they're just smoother, but it's still reflective. And then the... so back to materials. Okay, so then unvarnished obviously would have the reflection turns off. But then I might want to adjust this further. And you can see at the moment it's a wood material. If I right click on the appearance and then go to duplicate as generic, that turns it into a normal material, a generic material. Still has all the same attributes, but I can adjust everything. So here it's giving me the angles as values and I can make it anything. So if I just want to make it a bit less reflective, I can do that, instead of just using or being limited to the presets. The bumps as well, so I can fine tune that. You can see it's got the image. Yep. So at the angle, so if we're looking directly, we're not going to get very much reflection, which is true if you're looking at, say, directly at some highly reflective floorboards. It's still not going to work like a mirror. You're going to see the boards. But when you're looking at an angle, that's when you see the reflections. And that's how you get the look of certain materials. They reflect in different ways. So, so again, I'll just test that one out. Okay, so you can see the difference in the reflections there. And so images that use materials are often best started by getting them from the library, like I have. So I'll just go back there and show you. So on the left, you have your Revit material list. And then when you go to Appearance, you can bring things in from the Appearance library. But for things that just need to have a colour, or, well, let's get all of these walls, or some other simple texture, you don't need to go that far. So I've just selected, I thought those walls were all the same kind. It's going to make all these walls into the same type so I can work with them. Yeah. Okay, so here I want to make these walls into a different colour, essentially. So maybe I'll change it to shaded just so you can see that it is the same colour as my outside walls. So if I go to edit type, I've got to duplicate first, before I can change any properties, or all my walls are going to change. Okay, so generic 100 and 100 mil wall with something about the colour. So I'll make it, sick of doing red, so maybe I'll do blue. Blue and timber is difficult, but yeah, you can still do it. So let's do blue. And then edit for the structure. And I'm just going to change this finish material to a blue material. Okay, so with finish, again, to make a new material, right click on the material that you're starting with, duplicate, and we'll call this wall paint blue. And then I'm going to go to the appearance tab. Click and sorry, I'm not going to go to replace this time. All right, so it's on wall paint. You might see if it's on a generic material that the properties look different, but you'll still be able to find the colour swatch. So, clicking on the colour swatch, then you can see the standard colour selector, and this is where you maybe need to have some idea about colour theory. And I know you've worked with subtractive colours a bit, so doing your CMYK and printing colour models, but have you worked with your additive colour primaries, which is red, green and blue? So working with light, which is really, at the end of the day, what you work with always. So you see light, and that's really how everything, all colours are generated. Those colours are produced using those primaries, red, green and blue. It's only when you work with print media or paint or anything really to do with pigment that you work with those subtractive primaries, which is cyan, magenta and yellow, or the other model that people mix up with that, which is red, yellow, blue. So anyone think red, yellow, blue are the primaries still? If you're doing painting, you probably would. And that's okay. For painting, red, yellow and blue are close enough to the primaries. But for digital work, they're not anywhere near accurate enough. And they're not really the primaries. They haven't been the primaries in any serious work for about 100 years. But in a lot of fields where people aren't maybe as fussy, then they still use red, yellow, blue. So if you're taught painting, if you're taught the primaries in painting or art, then you're probably still used to red, yellow, blue, but try and get that out of your head because they're not the primaries, either cyan, magenta, yellow or red, green, blue. Okay, so red, green, blue are the primaries. They're the true primaries. And do you know any idea why primary colours even exist? Yeah, but then what about animals that see things differently? So why red, green and blue? It's obvious when you think about it, but it's surprising how often people don't take it this or just think about these basic things. Your eyes have red, green and blue receptors. It's that simple, right? And so all these people are going about pigment and physics and everything. It's great to understand it from that point of view, but the fundamental basis for primary colours is your own eyes, and we see red, green and blue. Different animals see different colours and they see them differently, and so they have different primaries. It's not a set in stone thing from physics, it's a subjective thing from us. And so you do need to understand this, to understand how you see and how rendering works. That's all I'll say about it for now, but I'm going to definitely, at some point much later on, give you a much longer talk about colour theory, because to understand all aspects of rendering, essentially you do need to have a bit of a deeper understanding of these colour models. In Photoshop, try and use red, green and blue as well. Is that what are you doing your modes in Photoshop? Yeah. Oh, good. So you're doing CMYK, I suppose, the printing at the end, are you? Or?
I don't know what you just said.
So when you're printing from Photoshop, do you go to your modes and change to CMYK at the end?
Oh, no,
to
RGB.
So you're just keeping it in RGB? Yeah. That's fine at first, because that's how you'll make your colours. You can't print all of those colours because a lot of the colours you can see on screen you cannot print. You just don't have the colour range with most printers, and that's normal.
Some of them have kind of looked oversaturated.
That's right, exactly, yep. But again, still work with RGB. And make sure you realise that when you see things like hue, sat and lume, hue, saturation, luminance is just another way of getting to that same colour model, RGB. It's always RGB if it's in those other models. Okay, so then you've got your full colour range here, and you can pick on those and then just fine tune it with the brightness if you like as well, but try and get used to thinking about the red, green and blue. Can't emphasise that enough. Okay, so I've got a blue that I'm happy with, and I'll just then go and look at the finish. So always think about the reflectivity, and then the well, I won't even put a texture in, so that'll do. I'll just click OK. So setting a colour really should be fairly straightforward as long as you can work with RGB. But then you might think that the colour hasn't been set because I can't see it on the wall. If I go to realistic, you can see that it has been set. Now I've gone and changed, what have I done there? Did I set my finish without duplicating, did I? Oh yes, I did. Okay, so I did something that you shouldn't do, but it's good to see this. I changed the original linen material because while I was talking, I forgot to duplicate. I forgot to replace. So going back to finish, here you can see it's using the same render material. And if you've been wondering why every time I go to replace, that is the reason. So let's go back to timber. Okay, so another good option there, instead of replacing, you can duplicate. So that way I've got linen, it's still called linen white unfortunately, but it's a new one. Back to finish. And there's linen white, the original, and I can just set that back to being white. There we are. So then in my new wall, the one that should be blue, I can fix that and assign doesn't get duplicated. So I did it to timber. That was clever of me. Okay, so I put in the timber material. So I'm all over the place today, but anyhow, that will work now if I use timber. Let's go back to graphics. Yep, okay, so the timber's basically got the setup I wanted. I should rename it really, but I'll leave it now as that, because really what I wanted to show you is that it's showing up in realistic, but not in shaded. And that's really the last major thing to watch out for with materials, and it should make it clearer than what I've been doing with the setup there, back in materials. Okay, so it's a timber material now that I'm working with. The appearance is blue, but the graphics is still whatever it was before. So that's why in shaded, it's that colour. So a simple thing you can do there is just tick use render appearance. That will pick up the colour from here as best it can. Right now, if it's an image, it's harder for it to pick up the colour, so you can always try it and then turn it off afterwards and change the colour to something else. But I know for simple colours, it'll do a great job. The floor is a different story. Okay, so the floor was the floorboards material. And then going to appearance, it's using this image as before. So if I tick use render appearance, it's got a brownish colour. It's done an okay job actually from that image to work out what the average colour would be. But I still wouldn't want that for my shaded colour. So I'm going to turn this off now, and then I can fine tune the colour and just make it a different brown. That'll do, maybe a bit more yellow, that's what I want.
So then it's just a visual cue for you know what that is.
Exactly, that's it. So there we are. Yep. So yellow and blue actually can work okay, even though that's not the best colour scheme in the world. But then again, with the rendering, it's still going to use the render material. All right, but then just putting that together with a few simple things that maybe I can get in from the library, and then to get you going with the rendering that hopefully you can start setting up over the next few weeks, as well as the regular components. So I'll just go into component, load family, and I'll get some just general furniture. I shall go to the Revit library here and okay. Okay, so I've just loaded my bench family. I'll just put a few of these in. Okay, so loading families into the library shouldn't be too difficult for you. But then just knowing where some of them are. Okay, so as well as the furniture and other similar families, you have the entourage. Don't forget about those. So the people, RPC male and female, are pretty good as a starting set. And when you look at the types for those, you'll see there are quite a few to choose from. Now, I know you need sculptures and things for this space. You'll find, I'm sure, if you look in Revit City, a lot of better ones than I have here, but well, I just want to give you some to start off. And so it's in here. Yes, this one. Yeah, okay, so here I've just got a bunch of sculptures and other similar things. And so I'll make a folder in the Museum Centre's Resources folder, and I'll just call it Extra Revit Families. So especially when you're doing things like rendering, it can help to have these generic objects just to help give an idea about the material and the lighting in context. So again, load family, and I'll just grab those. Okay, so they're a bit dated, some of them, but it will give you something to start with. So I'm just going to grab a few of these.
When you do artificial and sun,
Yeah.
right, why can't you see the light? See them in just artificial, but not sun and artificial.
Yeah, that's right, because the sun is just so bright compared to the artificial lights usually.
So there's just no way.
Well, you can, but often you've got to make the artificial lights really, really bright, much brighter than they would be in real life. Yeah, or yeah, that's right. Or play with the sun angle. Often you can't really see artificial light except at dawn and dusk. That's when you really can notice the effect of it. So if you go for sun angles, or times closer to then when it's not as bright. And
Just 'cause, for example, some of the spaces, because of the daytime gallery,
Yeah.
will have the sun, but
Definitely,
there are
yeah.
dark spots that would need artificial light.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and so those.
In those images, you adjust it.
Yeah, look, honestly, unless you're going to get the effect of the light directly in your render, so say if you're going to see light coming through a window, hitting the floor, and you can see that light effect, I wouldn't render with the sun. just do it all and simulate it. If you have to, put a studio light in behind your camera and just simulate the sun with that. So you can cheat, that's fine. So like I was saying, I've just got a few generic objects in there, so the entourage, though, I think might be the most interesting one for you at first, because you're used to doing those in Photoshop, which is great, because that's going to give you the ability to do virtually anything. But if you can get them to work automatically like this, it can really save time, and then you can just get a lot of them. So here, that's Florence, but we've got quite a few to choose from. About 10, not that many. But it's better than nothing. And they're automatic. Okay, so there's the new people, and so then rendering all the shadows and everything else is done automatically. But you can see already how much longer the render's taking. So hiding things and just simplifying the scene can definitely help with that. Also, you can see then that I haven't got light coming onto these people, so I'd need to think again about what I'm doing there, and maybe have some lights behind the camera, and I'll just do that, and then I'll put the render quality up and then maybe finish up. But again, remember, once you've placed a family, it's best to get it from the list, not by going to load family every time. There's recess can glow, that's what I want. One little tip: when you're placing lights, it's much better to place them using the component tool than to try and copy them. If you try and copy them, then it usually won't work. Okay, so I can't see any difference here, but when I render, well, you can see there it's got more lights, which will make it take longer, but I need the lights. Okay, so because I've got lights behind my camera, now I can see my people. And so then you can work out most things, like I've been saying, with draft, but then it wouldn't take much longer to do this on medium, still on screen resolution. And that will be a good way of testing the final materials. And then for your final renders, I'd say at least high with printer on 150 as a minimum. You need to check your image size as well to work out that resolution. But hopefully with Chris you've been doing quite a bit with image size in Photoshop and looking at how your resolution relates to that. Does that ring any bells, or have you not got up to that yet? You must have used image size though in Photoshop.
Image what?
To change image size?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so then setting the resolution. Exactly, yeah. And so just think about how that relates to your resolution. And so you can set that in Revit as well. And you'll need to set, like I said, 150 is okay. If you can do 300, that's better. That's the standard these days. But for this project, 150 is enough as a minimum. And then on high. If you go to best on 300 though, you won't believe the difference. It's huge. But like I said, it's a minimum high. Yeah, so much better.
I tried doing a high one before, but it was going to take forever.
Yeah, I mean, even high will take maybe an hour or two, yeah. So I won't set it onto that, but I'll leave it on high and 150. That should only take about half an hour with what I've got there. So I'll just set that rendering, and I'll show you that afterwards.